Prey using CryEngine 4. This game I was able to play the game with the high settings, textures on medium because of the VRAM. If you have an R7 370 or 4 GB, probably you can use textures on high or very high. For the frame rates, what I got was an average of 54 and a minimum of 35. It was very playable and smooth.
Just a little further. That was a phantom. Type an Anthrophantasmus. Keep moving. There, in the foyer. Grab the neuromod you see in the display case. Normally it's a fake, but I swapped in a real one for you. The neuromods are critical. You won't survive without using them to install new aptitudes. I've already updated your translation, so request it.
Dreamfall chapters, the final cut. This game uses Unity 5 and it is very demanding. It is a game that it was developed first with Unity 4, but then it was updated or ported to Unity 5. Unity 5 usually it is demanding, but not as much demanding as it is in this game. So I believe the port was a little bit complicated from one version to another. Anyway, I was able to play this game with some sort of a custom median preset, so I disabled some stuff and I enabled others, and I got an average of 53 and a minimum of 34. Since this is pretty much a storytelling game, I think if you get a frame rate above 30 frames per second, it is already enough for this game.
There are too many of you. I can't help everyone. Just go away.
Don't make a sound. It will hear you.
Who will?
The monster in the closet. It will hear you and eat us both.
She's already scared, but she needs to understand how dangerous the dream machine is. She's scared enough already, poor girl. I need to be careful. I promise it won't hurt you.
You swear?
I swear. I won't let it. But you need to get back home.
I can't find my way.
The way back is through there, through the wardrobe.
I can't go in there. It will eat me alive.
Not if we destroy it first. Don't worry. And whatever's in there, it's no match for me, I promise.
Are you like a superhero?
Something like that. What do you think of my costume?
It's really cool.
The Surge, the new game from Deck 13, the same developers of Lords of the Fallen, so they keep the same essence, so it's another Souls game, but this time on a futuristic world. So it uses also the same engine as Lords of the Fallen, so it is really good. For the frame rate, I think that playing with the high settings it is the better choice for this game. It provides you an average of 44 frames per second and a minimum of 31, so it never dropped from the 30 frames per second for me. Okay, if you want to target 60 frames per second, I don't really remember if I tried it or not. but I think it wasn't really good because there is a lot of details on this game, and so it would make the game to feel a little bit dumbed down. Oh yes, I remember now. Yes, I avoided 60 frames per second because it looked really bad comparing to this. So I prefer to go with something in between, you know, in between those 30 frames per second and those 60s. And so I end up playing the game with high settings. NBA Playgrounds. This game, it is using Unreal Engine 4. It is a fun game from NBA. It is also cheap, so the objective of this game obviously is to win the match. As far as I know, I tested this on the release, so in the month 5, on the day 17. And like I was saying, as far as I know, this game received some patches that might have improved the performance. Anyway, I was able to play with the high settings at 60 frames per second with minimum drops from time to time, so it was really good. If there was some optimization, you might be able to play with very high settings with no effort at all, alright? So that's it, NBA Playgrounds.
What happened there? Quick pass to his teammate. Oh, baby! Perfect shot. Perfectly released. Way off the mark. Goes for the jumper. Got the bucket. Swatted away.
MXGP 3, this game it is using Unreal Engine 4, contrary to its predecessors, so MXGP 1 and 2 had used the internal milestones engine, but this time they decide to move on with Unreal Engine 4, which makes the game more demanding. So I've tested the game with the high settings in 2 tracks. This track I have an average of 37 frames per second. The minimum came from the last sequence. When you finish the track there is a slow motion jump, and when that slow motion jump appears the frame rate drops below the 30 frames per second. Fortunately it's not a playable area, so it doesn't really affect the gameplay. But apart from that, it's that it. It's a game that plays quite well at high settings and above 30 frames per second in all the tracks. Vanquish is another game that was exclusive to the consoles, but this year it was released on the PC. This game uses the Platinum internal engine, so yes, it is developed by the Platinum. But like I was saying, it was released this year for the PC. Unfortunately, even using lower settings than maximum settings, I wasn't really able to stabilize at 60 frames per second. This is a very CPU bound game, so it means to have 60 frames per second you will need to have a much better CPU. Okay, despite, yes, this was a game that was locked to 30 frames per second on the old gen consoles, but still it is a very CPU bound game, and CPU really matters if you want to stabilize those 60 frames per second.
Sam, I'm picking up some sort of interference on the scanners. Looks temporal.
You think they're zapping something in?
Sam, back up! You're moving too far forward.
Don't worry.
Tekken 7, this game it is using Unreal Engine 4. This is a demanding game because it is required for you to run at 60 frames per second. If you don't run at 60 frames per second, the game will run in slow motion, so this game is completely hard-coded to 60, so you really need to have those 60 frames per second. In order to do that, with this PC, I was needed to use the median settings. I decided to use the anti-aliasing on low, and the textures I'm using ultra because this game doesn't consume too much VRAM. The worst part it was that I needed to use the 75% of resolution scaling, so basically I'm not playing the game with the native 1080p. The game kind of uses a lower resolution and then upscales to 1080p, which makes the game a little bit more blurrier, but the performance it is amazing. And if you ask yourself how it runs on the consoles, both standard consoles don't even run at 1080p either. So there you go, 60 frames.
KO. Round 2. Fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
KO. You win.
Você está me dando sono.
Dirt 4, this game was developed by the Codemasters, like the usual. They are using their fourth iteration of the Ego engine. For me, the graphics are pretty much the same as the other Dirts. What can I tell about this? Median settings, frame rate was always above 60 frames per second, even on the most dense areas. But unfortunately, after this benchmark on the latest days, far away from the time of that I made the original video, I noticed that the Rallycross it is a little bit demanding and throw the frame rate to values of 50 frames per second, sometimes high 40s. So if you perform Rallycross, it is required for you to have a better CPU, or the frame rate will drop from those 60 frames per second. Although in any other track aside from Rallycross, you will get those 60 frames per second with this PC using median settings.
Dip, right 5, left 5, dip, don't cut, left 3, long, tightens over crests, don't cut, 60, right 5, long, caution, crest, jump baby, right 5, crest. 100 through dip, crest, jump maybe, dip, 200 dip, right 5, crest, turn, hairpin left, bumps, 60. Dip. Bump. 100 through dip, and crest, jump maybe, 100 through gate, right 6, left 5 over crest, 80 through dip, 80 through dip, left 3 over crest, dip, crest, through gate, dip.
While Milestones have been moving all their games to Unreal Engine 4, it seems that MotoGP 17 still uses their internal engine, their in-house solution, and so the game it is very undemanding and very unimpressed regarding the visuals. So as you can see, we are able to run the game above 60 frames per second with the maximum settings and using 8 times of anti-aliasing. I suspect that it is 8 times multi-sampling anti-aliasing, which usually it is a very demanding anti-aliasing, and yet the game runs perfectly fine. Whatever, if you are playing with rain or not, it runs above 60 frames per second, which is very good. Get Even, a game developed by the Farm 51. This game it is using Unreal Engine 3. I just tested the first level, I didn't test any other levels, and it was a little bit weirdly optimized, so while on the internal areas I was able to get frame rates really above and beyond the 60 frames per second, getting to 100 frames per second very easily. Outside, I was usually getting bad frame rates like 30 to 40 frames per second, and it was a little bit weird because not only the CPU and GPU wasn't really fully optimized, there was always stuttering going on, so this was benchmarking on the month 6 of 26. So it's probably that the game it is now much better optimized, but by the time of the video it was a little bit weird, to be honest. Anyway, it was completely playable.
I know you're scared, but you have to be quiet. Can you do that for me? I'm gonna get you out of here.
I heard the code. It's 3001. I'm sure of it.
Lawbreakers beta, so this game it is nearly as dead. I'm not really sure if they have now more players or not, but anyway I decided to give it a run on the beta, and this game uses Unreal Engine 4, and by using median settings I was able to sustain the frame rates pretty much above the 60 frames per second with the minimums of 54. The graphics are rather acceptable. I would say that it is at the level of the Overwatch, and the game is really fast paced, so I recommend it to have really those 60 frames per second as a minimum or close to that in order to have a good experience like I did have. So completely playable. It's just questionable if you really want to buy this game right now when there isn't that much players online.
You have gained the lead.
F1 2017, developed by the Codemasters. This game uses Ego Engine 4, just like Dirt 4, but this is a very fast-paced game, so those 60 frames per second really comes handy. So for me the best settings to play this game it was by using the median presets and use the AA checkerboard. So yes, checkerboard, this is pretty much the same thing as PS4 Pro and Xbox One X does. It's really checkerboarding, okay, and it is fine in my opinion. It's not as clean as the native, but it's not really that bad. So with these settings I was able to get an average of 67 and a minimum of 52, so it was really well played. It plays really well in fact, and in my opinion it even plays better than PS4 and Xbox One, because the frame rate keeps it more close to those 60 frames per second than both standard consoles, so good result. Absolver, an indie game developed with Unreal Engine 4, where you need to fight with different stances. It's a very interesting game in fact, but the performance, this is a very demanding game. Anyway, I suspect that it would be more playable to try to target 60 frames per second, but in order to keep the artistic style and some graphics, I decided to keep up with the eye settings, and with the eye settings what you're going to get is an experience above the 30 frames per second, which I think it's acceptable for this type of game, no doubt, so it's playable. Life is Strange Before the Storm, now developed with a different developer. This time, instead of using Unreal Engine 3, they are using Unity 5, so the game could be a little bit more demanding for certain PCs, although on this desktop it was quite easy to run, so the minimum frame that I got, it was 80 frames per second, so it is really an undemanding game and very spectacular if you want to keep up with the story of Life is Strange, having this pre-sequel of it. Very interesting.
Now what to draw? Hey kids! Free candy.
Help you, miss?
You gotta let me in. Check it. I'm totally legit.
It's not a bad fake, kid, but you're in over your head here. Do yourself a favor and scram.
Can't let him push me around.
Destiny 2 open beta. As far as I know, the final version of the game runs pretty much the same as the sequence, so they are using their Tiger engine, created specifically for their online games, just like Destiny 1. I was trying to use high settings because I thought it would be the best settings to play, and with the high settings I got some estimated results because this game blocks softwares like MS Afterburner and stuff like that that register frame rates, but as far as I noticed, my minimum frame it was 37 and I got an average of pretty much 53 frames per second, so I think it's very good results. It is very playable and rather very acceptable graphically, so impressive ports to the PC in my opinion, which runs very fine in this old system.
Holiday's inbound. We need that ship off the field.
Someone told me you need a ride.